There are so many ways to give a truly terrible sermon. Here's 10 more. This from the Reverend Jane Rzepka and the Reverend Ken Sawyer in their book Thematic Preaching, a great introductory preaching manual for Unitarian Universalists, added to by students in my preaching class at Meadville Lombard over the last few years, one of our Unitarian seminaries, and also added to by folks who've been in my lay preaching class. I've used the Reverend Eric Hewitt's very, very good text, the Shared Pulpit, which is a great, great preaching workshop for folks who haven't preached before. All of them have contributed some of the ideas and ways to give a terrible sermon. If you have other ways to give a terrible sermon, I invite you add them down below and I'll get them into one of the future lists here. Here we go. 1, assume that we all share the same assumptions, experience, background, politics, and privilege. This shows up everywhere. The notion that if we weren't all in church, surely we would all be at home reading the New Yorker, the New York Times, and listening to NPR. Well, no. Maybe some of us would. That goes on and on and on and on. Telling the congregation, when you were in college, surely it was like such and such. Well, I don't know, maybe not. Not everyone has the same experience as you. Take that seriously. That doesn't mean you can't talk about your experience and background and politics and privilege and assumptions. You just got to know those are assumptions, and you name it and own it. 2, brag. Here's a sermon about how great I am. I am the greatest. I'm so good. It's so wonderful. This also, though, I'm making it sound really obviously like a terrible idea, but bragging can be one of those things, including humble brags, that you get really positive feedback on. Tell a story about how great you are, and people will come up to you after the service and agree with you about how great you are, and that will feel great. But that's a trap. Don't believe it. Don't believe the people in the receiving line who sing your praises. Don't believe the people in the receiving line who throw you under the bus. Neither of them are right. Both of those are traps to fall into. 3, no one cares if you really can't sing. Break into song in the middle of your sermon. Again, it's not that you can't ever sing. You just better do that stuff well. With heart, I am thinking of President Obama breaking into Amazing Grace in the middle of delivering a eulogy. And he was not an astonishingly gifted singer, but he was strong enough and that singing was honest and raw enough that it was not about him. And my experience of that moment wasn't, oh, look at President Obama's singing voice. He was a conduit for a feeling, an experience, and a grace that was moving through him in that moment. Do that in your singing in the middle of the sermon, but it's not musical theater. 4, use a string of cliches. Avoid cliches like the plague. There are so many cliches that just naturally slip into your writing and speaking. And this is a place where, when you're editing, this is one of the things to go back through with a careful eye towards. When you're editing sort of like on the sentence by sentence level, not the organization of things or the big ideas, but when you're looking at each individual sentence to say, does this sentence make sense and is intelligible and clear and so on, that's the time that you're also looking and say, what is the language that I'm using? Am I using fresh, alive language, or am I relying on rote cliches? And I include in that, maybe on the boundary between cliche and jargon, are some really great phrases. I think about centering the voices of the marginalized. What that phrase is about is so absolutely vitally important, critically important and real and raw and places on us a demand that is really hard and serious to live up and into. None of which is necessarily contained in that line, and unless people already know all of that and have a deep understanding of it. What's the same way that you can say what you mean in language that catches them, that makes them say, oh, that's what that's about, instead of, oh, yeah, okay, fine. Or instead of, oh, yeah, I agree. Don't look at anyone. Don't look at anyone. Look off into space, look down at your notes, don't look at anyone. I tend to think the more challenging one of these often is staying stuck on your manuscript. And first, the work is, how do you come off your manuscript? How do you format it in a way that's easy to come off it? How do you know it well enough that you're not glued to it? How have you written it for yourself that your sentences aren't like 18 clauses long and you can't get out of the page lest you lose everyone, including yourself? But then also, you're in the room with people. Right now, I am talking to a phone, and it is weird because I'm not actually looking at anyone, even though hopefully it kind of feels like I'm putting that energy out there. But when you're preaching, you're in an actual room with actual people. Connect with them, to show them that you're there with them, to be there with them, and also to help yourself read where they are. You get so much information and energy back from the room. Accept it and pay attention to it. In order to do that, you got to look at them. You can understand that in different ways. I mean, if you're vision impaired, if you don't have sight, you can feel some of that stuff in different ways and experience that energy and how they're receiving things. So the larger umbrella there is like actually be in the room with the people that you're with. Gratuitous manipulation of their feelings is always appreciated. If you don't right now, eventually you will come to a point where you can make them cry on demand, or laugh on demand, or be joyful and excited on demand. And that may feel really cathartic for them, and that may feel great for you. And you may get great, wonderful feedback. But if it's not done honestly, in the service of this thing that is moving through you, then it is just manipulation. And it's easy to fall into the trap of doing things that make people feel good or make people feel bad. Don't do that. Whine. Just complain about stuff, just get up there and complain about stuff for a long time. No solutions, no purpose, no larger context. Just whine about how bad it is. Don't get me wrong. You gotta name difficult truths, but naming difficult truths is not the same thing as whining. Name difficult truths, afflict the comfortable, rise to the pulpit without a solution for the problems that you're naming. That's okay. You can talk about problems, real problems, for which there isn't like a solution to them. But still, that's also different than whining. Keep them abreast of your children and pets with amusing tales. Again, it's not that you can't ever talk about your children and pets, except you need consent from your children. Your children's stories don't belong to you, and your children's relationship with the congregation is your children's relationship with the congregation, not yours to use for the benefit of your own preaching. Maybe that's not true about your pets, though. But when I think about this, keep them abreast of your children and pets with amusing tales. This is not everything I need to know I learned in kindergarten, in which amusing tales act in the service of deeper truth and meaning. This is fluff and filler. And even more than that, it puts you at center stage rather than the thing you're pointing to. When I think about when am I going to use my own stories or my family or friends' stories with permission after conversation, or my parishioners' stories, again, with permission after conversation, or my pets, all of those things, I'm using them because they are in the service of something more than that story themselves, and in the service of something more than having my listeners just like me. They're going to like you. You don't need to do that. 9, focus on giving a great sermon rather than speaking to the hearts and minds of your people. Focus on giving a great sermon rather than speaking to the hearts and minds of your people. Just sit with that one for the next 10 years. Scold them. You people suck. Don't do that. Scolding is, when I hear that, I think of that as something that is designed to provoke a response of guilt and shame. Guilt and shame are traps that keep people looking inward instead of engaged outward with the world around them. So if there's a lot of conflict in the congregation and you're scolding them about it, instead of engaging with the question of that conflict, in they go down the rabbit hole and the status quo stays the same. I feel that same way about so much of our justice work. That stuff's fraught enough, and sometimes people take away guilt and shame, even when that's not even a little bit what you are in fact preaching. But scolding them, provoking guilt and shame, keeps the status quo where it is and keeps them stuck and trapped inside themselves instead of engaging with the world. Let me go back to the last one, because I feel like I should say at least a couple words to unpack that. Focus, here we go, reversal, number 9 again. Focus on giving a great sermon rather than speaking to the hearts and minds of your people. You can put together a piece of writing or delivery that is so tightly and well done. You can put together a sermon that you feel names a critically important truth about the world or reality or suffering or life or politics. I don't even know, right? You can craft it so that it is an exquisite essay or an amazing TED Talk that would be viral instantly. But if your people and their actual situation in the moment in reality is not in that sermon, that is not a successful sermon. The sermon is not written as an abstract form to be given to, whoever, wherever, whenever. It happens in relationship with actual people, and even if you don't know them well, at least you usually know a place and a time. Even if you don't know them, you know something about the context of the moment that you're in. And if that sort of human reality doesn't show up in your sermon, it doesn't matter how good it is. It's a piece of art under glass with a velvet rope to keep people away from it. And that's not what people come for. That's not what people come for. Church or preaching or the mission that we're all invited into. We have museums already that have those amazing things under glass. Go there instead. Have more ways to give a terrible sermon? This is my YouTube pitch. Add them in the comments down below. Don't forget to click like and subscribe.